Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Well, I have a special episode today. I'm going to cover the process of reading through the Greek Tragedies. This is an episode I definitely did not think I would ever record, in the sense that I just read through all of the surviving Greek tragedies. I was just planning to read 2 or 3 by each playwright, but I got hooked immediately, and I figured it takes 2 to 3 hours to read each play. There are 33 surviving plays. I am going to just read all of them, no matter how long it takes. And I am so glad I did. It was so much fun. I learned so much. I am just in love with these Greek tragedies. And so I wanted to take an episode and just kind of share what it was like reading through all of them, talk about the order that I read them in, some of my initial thoughts, talk about tragedy as a whole. What is it? How are they performed? Go over and cover some of the themes that showed up in quite a lot of the tragedy plays, share my favorites, and also just ask the question, if I had to do it all over again, would I read them in the order I read them, or would I do a different order? And quick answer to that is I would do a different order, and I'm going to share that at the end on how I would read them and in what order I would read them. And just some other thoughts on approaching the Greek tragedies if I were to do it again. So I started in April of 2024 with the Oresteia by Aeschylus, and then I finished in May of 2025, and I finished with Euripides. And so for the reading structure I followed, I started with, I took the 3 Greek playwrights of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides and read them in chronological order, in the sense of who was born first and that. And so their 3 lives overlapped, which is just, it's an incredible piece of history that these 3 playwrights were alive at the same time. Their plays, their tragedy plays, were performed against each other. They would have competitions. I'll talk about that when I get into the section about tragedy. But the fact that 3 of the greatest tragedy writers of all time lived at the same time, with the 4th being Shakespeare. So these 3 lived at the same time. It's just astonishing. So what I did is I started with Aeschylus, went to Sophocles, and then finished with Euripides. And I kind of had a haphazard manner of doing this. With Aeschylus, I then started with his Oresteia, and then read his 4 other surviving plays. With Sophocles, I started with the Theban plays. It's not a trilogy, but they usually place them together. And then I went on to his 4 other plays after that. And then, but for Euripides, I tried to read them in chronological order of when Euripides actually wrote them. Euripides didn't have kind of 3 that were always put together, that kind of thing. It was just more, he had 19 surviving plays, so I wanted to just read them in chronological order. So that's the order in which I read them. And so started and finished Aeschylus before going into Sophocles, finished Sophocles before going into Euripides. I had a lot of trouble with Aeschylus. It took me a while to get into reading Aeschylus, and there were a few reasons for that. One, just from what I've read in some of the introductions and things like that, the style of Aeschylus is a little more ancient, and it's just, even the Greek is harder to read. I was reading translations of these, but just the overall kind of structure of Aeschylus, I guess, is a little harder. And then I think I just had trouble getting into tragedy as a genre as well. The other part of this is when I was reading Aeschylus, I had a project with work that was really consuming all my thought and time, to where when I would sit down, my mind would just immediately go to that problem at work, and I couldn't. It was just hard for me to read. So I ended up reading the Oresteia by Aeschylus 4 times. I just would read it, get another translation, read that, get an introduction, read that. I joined a reading group and where we went through the Oresteia, and it took me a long time, but I'm glad I put in that work, because that paid dividends later on for the other tragedy plays. I kind of realized what was going on, what the structure was, how these were set up, and that helped me get through through the rest. So when I get into the section here about how would I reread these, I'll talk about maybe a different approach and perhaps not starting with Aeschylus. For initial thoughts, these tragedy plays, this was some of the best reading I've had in my life, like some of the best reading experiences I've ever encountered in books. And these were plays, they were meant to be performed. There probably wasn't even the idea that they would be written down and somebody 2,500 years later reading them. But nevertheless, that's how we have them. We don't know the music that was played. There wasn't like music notation that we have that we can pull out and say, oh, this is how this chorus would have sung this piece or how this would have been done. So we're limited in how we're experiencing this, but just even at that, I mean, I can't imagine being at this theater in Athens and seeing these performed 2,500 years ago. It must have just been astonishing. But to have all those pieces together, all we have is the text. But even just the text, it's some of the best stuff I've ever read. It covers some of the deepest questions of humankind. If you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you kind of see some of these questions being addressed or asked for the first time. And then the tragedy plays are taking these questions and digging in deeper, approaching them from a more dramatic point of view and in theater. And the other thing that these tragedy plays did is they filled out the story. So in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you get kind of glimpses at different pieces of different myths. They might be referenced in the Iliad, and so you get kind of a story of, this happened with Heracles or some other god or something, but you just kind of, it's just a brief mention of this story and you don't know the full story. And the audience probably would have, the original audience to these plays, but we don't. And so you just kind of get a little glimpse, but then these tragedy plays take those mentions and just kind of just fill them out, like create a story around that, but turn it into a drama. There's questions being asked and just taking these things deeper. So I loved that aspect of just how these tragedy plays kind of filled out myths that there was a spark of, you knew it was there, but you just didn't know kind of the full story. And so as you get to know more, you end up changing your mind. I just kind of kept realizing that, okay, I think about this person or this god in a certain way, but then you come across a tragedy play that talks about that person in a new light, and you think, oh wow, that's interesting. And so one example would be Philoctetes by Sophocles. We learn about a character named Neoptolemus in that play, and Neoptolemus is the son of Achilles. And Neoptolemus, we learn that he in it, like this is after the Iliad, but he would have killed Priam, the king of Troy. He killed Priam while Priam was holding on to the altar. That's a form of supplication. You don't kill somebody if they are holding on to the altar. And Neoptolemus did that and killed the king. Neoptolemus also threw the child of Hector off of the walls to kill this young child. So there's these aspects of desecration that Neoptolemus participates in the Greek mythology. But in this play by Sophocles called Philoctetes, you see kind of like a fresh Neoptolemus. This is before he's committed these atrocities, and you see almost like a pure person in the sense of like he's trying to decide, am I going to lie or tell the truth? And he keeps talking about his nature being truthful nature, and yet later on that he commits these atrocities. So you kind of see like, okay, here are the opening parts of where he starts to shift, where he's got these high ideals, but he ends up committing these atrocities later on. Is there some kind of a path that we can see where he's going along this way? And that's the great thing about these Greek tragedies is you're seeing these people in different parts of their life. And so you're kind of seeing a general arc to their life. You're seeing where things started, where things ended up. And so as you're in that process, you might actually come across something of the person later in life. And so you have a positive or a negative view of them at that point. But then you read about that earlier, and it just kind of shifts how you think. And so as you're coming across this additional information, I just kept finding my mind changing about what I thought about these people, what I knew about their story. And that was just so cool. I mean, it keeps adding. Like it's the gift that keeps on giving. You, the more you read, the deeper you go into this Greek mythology, and you know about these characters, and you see how their interactions, they make sense. There are things in the Iliad that when I read it, I just, like, this doesn't make sense. But you read kind of the backstories that come about in some of these tragedy plays, and you think, oh, okay, that makes sense now. The tragedies are such that they reward multiple readings and they reward discussion. If you can be a part of a group that is discussing these plays, it's just amazing. Like, you'll find yourself kind of realizing things you didn't even know were there in the text. You'll hear thoughts from other people, and that's a really great way to go about that. So that's just some initial thoughts, how I approach the tragedies. Next up, I'm going to talk about tragedy as a whole. What is it? What are the parts that make up a tragedy, and then how are they performed? And I'll cover that in the next segment here. So what is a tragedy? Well, a tragedy, as I came to understand it, is an impossible situation. It's a play where characters are put in a situation where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. No matter what decision you make, it's gonna be awful. You're contemplating just awful things on either side. Like there's no way out of these things, and you just have to make a decision, and it's going to be awful either way. So what I found myself doing is just wondering, what would I do in this situation? Like, this is an awful situation. There are no good answers, no good actions you can take. What would I do? And so that's one aspect of tragedy, just this aspect of it being an impossible situation. There are other elements. I mean, it's called a tragedy. There are tragic elements. There are just awful things that happen to people. I kind of had a thing going where I was trying to determine who suffered the most, like who had it the worst in all of Greek tragedy, and so I have some ideas on that. But there's as it would suggest with it being called tragedy, there are tragic elements. Other pieces of tragedy are they're extreme. They're putting people in extreme situations. They're making extreme choices, but they're making like the most awful choices in especially against Greek culture. That, like, there were things that you just didn't do, and the characters would do those things, and they would do it to the extreme, and that turns a lot of people off. It can be off-putting just in the sense of how do I relate to this? Like, this is insane. Like, no one would do this. But I think if you look at it as like just going into it knowing that this is the extreme of things, but there's a continuum here, and maybe you do something that's at the opposite side of like this most horrible thing you could do, but there's certain elements of it, and if you can kind of identify it there, they don't seem so far out. Like it's different levels, and this is the highest level. But just part of it is to shock you and to make you think of like what's the right answer here, or are they doing things in the right way? What would you do? But let's present it in a way that I'm just shocking you. It's almost like reading a Cormac McCarthy novel. You almost have to read it twice. The first time is just going to shock you so much that you're going to hate it. At least I did. And then the second time is like, oh, okay, I know what's happening here. I can now approach this in a more in a better way in my mind. And then the last aspect of what is tragedy is so much of it is that there's some sort of a fate or destiny that is in play. And that is contrasted against a human agency. So you've got the gods, there's this fate and destiny, and we oftentimes learn about that through oracles. And so there's an oracle given, and this is what is going to happen. And you see the human agency of and the person involved may even know that oracle, or they may know that fate, and they're going to fight against it. Or they may have no idea that fate is in play, but we do as the audience, and we just see these people like we do watching a horror film and telling the person on the screen, do not go into that room, and they go into the room, and that like perfectly encapsulates so many of these things. But there's this aspect of fate that it's something is going to happen. You cannot battle against that. One of the plays calls it the unrelenting march of fate. And this goes back to the Iliad. It's something I thought about a lot when I was reading the Iliad, of just the will of Zeus. That it's in the first lines of the Iliad. So how much of what happened in the Iliad, how much of that was the will of Zeus? How much of it was the will of the people involved? Did Zeus did he pull strings to make people do certain things, or did he kind of work people's decisions into his will? These are just kind of some of the questions that come up right away in Greek literature, and they get massaged. You dive a lot deeper into them in these tragedies. The tragedy plays themselves, there are kind of 5 different parts that I would look at for each play. And just if you're about to go into them for the first time, or if you just kind of want a framework on how to approach them, if you look at these 5 things and keep them in mind throughout the play, it's very helpful. And the first of that is the chorus. Who makes up the chorus? And the chorus would be 12 to 15 people in these plays. And the chorus would be a kind of a connection point between the audience and the performers. And so there's an element of they're helping the audience understand what's going on, maybe giving a different viewpoint, or saying, hey, what this person did, this is wild, but it relates to this story or this oracle. And so it's kind of a connection point with the audience, but it's just interesting to know who the chorus is. Is it made up of women in that town? Is it made up of women who are not from that town? So maybe they're not sympathetic with the ruler of that town, or they are sympathetic. There's just so many questions you can ask about based on who the chorus is made of. Is the chorus made of slaves? Is it made of free people? Is it made of old people or young people? It really sets the tone for the rest of the tragedy. The second thing to look at is the location. Where does this take place? Just to know if it's in part of Greece. Is this in Troy? Is this at the part of the Trojan War, all those kind of things, just to know the location. The third thing to recognize is who is the first speaker. The first speaker gives the prologue, and the prologue sets the stage for the entire tragedy. So and it's also fun to note is this first speaker, is it a god or is it a human? Sometimes a god will start off the play, and so that's an interesting vantage point from which to start a play. Other times it's a human, but almost every time it just gives an introduction of where are we, what mythology or what myth is being referenced here, what's the backstory before we get into the action of the play here. The fourth thing to look at is where is this in the mythical timeline? Does this fall before the Trojan War? Is it after? Is this just kind of knowing where it falls in the overall Greek mythology is very helpful. And then the last thing I would look at is which epic cycle was it a part of? There are 2 major epic cycles, and those were the Theban epic cycle. The first one is the Theban epic cycle, and then the second one is the Trojan epic cycle. And so most of the stories fall within those, and then there's kind of a third category of just other. And so there'd be the other myths in that. So when I share the suggested structure, I actually structure them by epic cycle, to where you read the Theban cycle together, you read the Trojan cycle together, and then you read the others together as well. So those are 5 helpful things to look at when you're looking at a tragedy play. As for how were they performed, well, I think the best way that we can think of them is to consider them as we would in opera. Now there was music, there was dancing, there were instruments, there was singing, and it's most akin to an opera from what we know, or perhaps musical theater. And so you had all those things going on. Again, we just have the text, so we're reading it, but it's not how it was. I mean, it was performed. It was action. You were seeing this. You were hearing it. Almost all of the chorus parts were sung, and even some of the parts that were that are dialogue would have been sung as well. They would have been performed in front of tens of thousands of people. Some of the theaters would seat 20,000 people. The main theater in Athens was right on the hill where the Acropolis is, and there would be a festival every spring, the City Dionysus. In that festival, they would have these tragedy plays performed over a number of days, but each tragedy playwright would get to perform 4 plays, and they would just perform them in a row. And 3 of the plays would be tragedies, and then the final one would be a satyr play. And satyr is Satyr, and those are kind of like funny, bawdy, like if you imagine a college fraternity putting on a play, that's what it would be. But you just think you've just seen 3 tragedies, and you just kind of need some comic relief, and so the satyr play would kind of give that comic relief. But not only were these performed, they were then in competition with one another. So Aeschylus would be in competition with Sophocles. Sophocles would be in competition with Euripides, and we know who won in a lot of these cases. And in some of the cases, we know which 3 plays were performed together. We know what satyr play would have been performed with the 3 tragedies. And so sometimes the plays would have had a continuity. So what we see in Aeschylus with the Oresteia, there is a consistency from Agamemnon and the other 2 plays in that like it follows a path and it all relates to each other. And but most of what we have is just like one play out of the 3, and so we don't know the full stories, and even the Theban cycle, it wouldn't have been performed together. Those 3 plays were written many years apart by Sophocles, but they're kind of placed together just more by topic. These plays would have been performed during the day, so imagine it would have been kind of hot, like it's in the sun, but you're watching these plays, and the performers would have worn masks. So if you have a Apple device and you want to turn off your screen, like especially on your watch, you push that button where it's got 2 masks. Those are the masks for tragedy and comedy, and that comes to us from 2,500 years ago. I love that that's the icon they use on the Apple devices. But those were the masks that people, the actors would have put on. Aeschylus would use 2 actors, and he's credited with introducing a second actor. I know that seems very strange to us now. Like, what do you mean introduced second actor? Well, before that, Thespis, where we get the word thespian, is credited with creating the first actor. So you just kind of imagine, before that, there would have been a chorus. So you would have gone and heard a chorus sing, and they might have sung a story. The best way I know to think about it is if you go see Handel's Messiah, and that's a choral performance. And there's no one speaking, there's no speaking parts, but you're kind of getting a story from the Bible, but through Handel's Messiah. I went to see Handel's Messiah one time, and there was an actor. There was a person who talked about the life of Handel, kind of in between the Messiah being performed. And so that's almost like having an actor. And so it's someone that's separate from the chorus that can kind of give another side of the story or give additional information. It just kind of sets it apart from the chorus. Now with Aeschylus, when you add a second actor, now it allows you to have dialogue, some drama, things going back and forth. And then Sophocles is credited with adding the third actor. And they mainly stuck with just 3 actors. And so what that means is there would only be 3 actors for the play, but even if the play contained 9 characters. Those 3 actors would play all 9 characters. And I say actors because they would have all been men. So if they were playing a woman's part, the mask would have designated them as a woman, or maybe the way they spoke or that kind of thing. But these 3 actors would have played all the parts, and so they just would have changed character throughout to act these different parts. So it makes it for very interesting and kind of considering the plays on, okay, would the main character, the protagonist, would they have been out there the entire time? Did they change character at all? Probably not. So most of the time, one actor would have been the protagonist the entire time, but then the other 2 actors probably would have changed. And like Sophocles uses this to absolute brilliance in the play Philoctetes, just to make you wonder, oh, was this one person that was out before? Did they just kind of put on a different disguise? So it's actually the same person, but it's a different disguise, or is it the actual person that that we think they are? So some of that, does not come across if you're just reading the text, but you kind of consider, what would this have been like being performed? And there's just a lot of different aspects that can be looked at there. In terms of how many of these plays survive, so we have 7 that have survived from Aeschylus, 7 that have survived from Sophocles, and then 19 that have survived from Euripides. And Aeschylus is, they think he wrote around 80. For Sophocles, they think he wrote 123, and then Euripides, they think he wrote 92. So we have a very small number of plays that have survived. And I've gotten the question, it's so that, why don't we have more? It's so terrible that we don't have more. And I think the better thing to consider is just the fact that we have these at all. I mean, some of these came down to like 1 copy remaining, and that copy was copied, and then we have what we have now. But like, it came down to us having 1 copy in the entire world, and 1,000 years ago or something, or 500 years ago. And some guy from Italy like goes over to the Byzantine Empire and gets the last one before it's burned down. Istanbul is burned down, and that's how we have it. Or we get some of these from tombs in Egypt. I mean, of all things, like just crazy stuff like that, where these plays would have been copied in Alexandria, in the Library of Alexandria, and then parts of the parchment would have been put into tombs. And as we open some of these tombs, there's some of these parts of these plays or the plays in whole, and just like, that's so fascinating. So that's the other part of this is we have fragments, and that's part of what I read for this going through the Greek tragedies as well, is there are books just showing the fragments of the plays that we're missing. So we might have references to these other plays, like Aristotle might have said, this line from Sophocles is so good, and it captured this. So we've lost the play, but we have this reference from Aristotle or Philo or someone else. And so we know that what play they came from, and we can kind of try to piece some of it together. We also have physical fragments. So kind of like the tomb example I gave in Egypt, we've got different fragments of some of these plays, and you can kind of piece them together. And then for the stories themselves, like if we've lost the entire play, we don't know what it's about. We might know parts of the myth, but we can gather a lot of this from vase paintings. So you've seen those vase paintings from Greece. Well, those actually help a lot in helping us know some of the myths that have been lost in that would have been part of these tragedy plays. So last thing I want to say about just, and I guess in how to relate it to us, is it would be like Titanic. Like the audience in Greece, they knew Greek mythology, they knew all these stories, and so they're being presented with a story that they already know, but it's taking a deeper look into the story. Perhaps it's taking an alternative take on a story that was well known, like Helen did by Euripides, and so the audience is kind of on the edge of their seat, even though they know the story. And the best way we can relate, I think, is looking at the movie Titanic. A lot of us went to the theater and saw that. Some of us went multiple times to see this movie. And why? Like we knew the ending. We knew it was a tragedy. We knew the ship sank. But they took one story, they took a love story from that and just kind of expanded on it. And so you're on the edge of your seat because of that. And that's very similar to these tragedy plays where the audience knew the story. We mostly don't, unless you kind of have a background in Greek mythology. And so that's something that we lack, is just going into these tragedy plays, not knowing the entire mythology, but just kind of think of it that way of it being like Titanic. All right, in the next segment here, I will cover, it'll be the final segment, and I will cover some of the themes, my favorite plays, and then a suggested reading structure for going through the tragedy plays. Well, these tragedy plays cover some of the biggest and deepest concerns of humankind. And if you start off with Aeschylus and the Oresteia, you start off with a bang. You learn about Agamemnon returning from the Trojan War. His wife Clytemnestra kills him. Clytemnestra and Agamemnon's son then kills Clytemnestra, so he kills his mother. He is approached by Furies. You can't just kill your mother. And so these Furies attack him. They attack his brain. They attack his mind. And so how do you get out of that? Like, what happens now? You've killed your mother. What happens? And, kind of this unexpected thing happens in the last play where law, deliberation, justice is established, and it's established within this play. And yes, it's kind of the dividing line between civilized and barbarian, but you've got this just incredible ending where Athena establishes a court of law where Orestes can go and get justice for what he has done. And it's just like, if say we were missing that third play and we just had the first two, like, we would not expect it to end that way. And so that's one kind of curious thing to consider when we're reading these other plays and just not having the full trilogies of these. Like, we don't know how a lot of them ended, or we have the ending, we don't know the first parts of them, but just to consider that. But that is a huge thing. And so right away I began looking at that in the lens of Ares versus Areopagus. So where Athena establishes justice is at the Areopagus, which is a hill right by the Acropolis in Athens. The Areopagus is also where the Apostle Paul spoke in the book of Acts. So the Areopagus it's right by the Acropolis there. And that's where Athena establishes law and deliberation. And but it's called the Rock of Ares, the Areopagus. But Ares is the god of war, he's the god of conflict, he's god of force. And so you've got this idea that the Areopagus is where justice and deliberation, and that's the exact opposite of getting things done by force or by war. And so you see right away there's this theme established of Ares versus Areopagus, of force versus deliberation, of war versus talking things through and diplomacy. And you see that in so many of the plays. Like how are you gonna, what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna force your will, or are you gonna try to persuade? And you see this, and then you see it when you get to reading some of the history, like Thucydides. And the Greeks have these ideals of force is the side of barbarians, but we're civilized. But yet, when they get into war, they go into the side of Ares. They go into the force side in the fixing things and solving things by war as opposed to deliberation. So there's this constant battle of, we want to be on the side of talking things through, deliberation. We don't want to be on the force of just, or the side of just doing force all the time. But you just see that come up so much, and it was so incredible to see it right at the beginning there. You also have a theme of fate versus choice. What I talked about earlier, just on there's a destiny or a fate, and we learn about that through oracles. And the humans in these tragedy plays, they have choices to make. And are they going to choose along that side of of destiny, of what is fated for them, or are they going to try to fight that? So that is a huge theme that kind of underlies all of Greek tragedy. You have the family versus the polis. You have the family kind of versus the city. Like, do you put your family first? Do you put the city first? And it's so fascinating to read these tragedy plays through that lens, because you could read the same play, and this would just be so much fun for like a high school or college class, but you have one side of the class take the side of the family, you have the other side take the side of the city, and you read a particular play and you look at it and you say, okay, this person has prioritized their family, but they've prioritized it at the expense of the city, and so the city is going to get attacked because they have prioritized their family. Or so is that person good for doing that? Are they putting their whole city at risk for the choices they're making? It's just like, it's so fun to kind of think through these things. You can look at somebody as the good guy or the bad guy in each of these plays based on just kind of that framework. Justice, that is a huge one. Where does the law come from, and whose law do you obey? There's one of the plays where a murder is committed, and the person asks the murderer, whose justice? Whose justice do you obey? Do you obey yours, or do you obey a higher justice? Do you obey the justice of the gods? This idea: you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you're going to have your own rules on what justice is, well, you're probably going to be the first person to suffer from those rules, as opposed to looking at a higher justice. But just kind of considering justice at all, and justice in one sense is a laying down of power by the powerful, as opposed to using force and just getting things done by force. Those who are more powerful have to take a step back and allow justice to make its way through. A huge theme, and a very unfortunate one in Greek tragedy, is that it is the innocent who often suffer. You see that over and over. The people who are putting forth the force or the tragedy, they don't suffer. Like they kind of slide by, whereas there's this innocent person that must suffer for the decisions and actions of other people, and it's just part of the tragedy of it all. Another big theme is that of curses, and so there are family curses. People curse one another, and then that just kind of stays with that family. And it's just kind of interesting to look at it like, how is a curse broken? Can a curse be broken? Why does it impact every person in that family through the line? Is death the only solution to the curse? Like everyone from that family just has to die? It's just kind of an interesting way to look at a lot of these tragedy plays. My favorites here are about 7 or 8 of my favorite ones. I loved Philoctetes by Sophocles. I just covered that. I lead a reading group, and we discussed that during May. And you could just keep going on different discussion points in that play. One thing that I thought was just brilliant by Sophocles is that he shows how lying leads to violence. You've got Odysseus trying to teach Neoptolemus to lie, to get his way with Philoctetes and get Philoctetes to do something for him. And Neoptolemus is saying, no, that's not in my nature. But you see, if you lie to somebody and it doesn't work and they find out that you've lied, you're stuck. You can't then tell the truth because the person doesn't trust you. You can't tell another lie because you've lost that. They don't know if it's going to be true or not. And so you must resort to violence if you're going to get the thing done that you need done, because you started with a lie. So you just kind of see this path from lie to violence. And it just made me think about it from a political level, like a whole country level. Like what if a country is lying to itself? What if a person is lying to themselves? Where we see violence, is there some aspect that a lie has led to that violence, whether at an entire country level, a political party level, a personal level? it just kind of had me ask that question, and I think it's just a brilliant insight by Sophocles in that play. There's also this question of who is wiser. You've got Odysseus, who is known as the wise person, friends with Athena, and yet Neoptolemus comes out as the wiser person in that play. So you get this element of questioning the myths too. Like, is Odysseus really clever? Is he really the smart one if he's using these means to get the ends that he desires? Another of my favorites was Iphigenia at Aulis, and that is just a good example of a story where I had a ton of questions. So the story there is that in order for the Greeks to sail out from Greece to Troy to get Helen back and for the Trojan War, they have to make a sacrifice. The winds are not blowing, and Agamemnon has done something wrong, and the way to atone for that is that he has to kill his own daughter. And I knew the story. I'd come across the story in other reading, but I just kind of wondered, like, how did that go down? How did Agamemnon talk to his wife about that? Like, how did Agamemnon kill his own daughter? Did he have other people do it? How did he justify it to himself? What was the internal dialogue? What did he tell his daughter? I was just kind of thinking through all these things, and then you get to this play, Iphigenia at Aulis, and you see, and that one's by Euripides, but you just kind of see, oh, this is what would have been involved in that, and it just adds to the tragedy of like seeing what would have had to have happened to get this done. Another one, Iphigenia at Taurus, and this is also by Euripides, and kind of gives like an alternate version of the Iphigenia story, where she's saved at the last moment. She's whisked away to Taurus, and then she lives out her life there as a priestess to Apollo, I believe. And it's kind of like a fan fiction. And I use that term. Someone said it's not like fan fiction, but there's an element of it where it's kind of a different story that's part of it. And so I loved that aspect of it. Next up, one that I really liked was Helen by Euripides. And there's the story there, and again, it's kind of like a fan fiction where Helen never went to Troy. She was never kidnapped by Paris. That was just a phantom of her, and she spent the entire war in Egypt. And but I mean, to pull that off, to like everyone knows the Helen story, and to completely change it and just kind of make you wonder, like, oh, was I tricked? Like, did Helen really spend the time in Egypt as opposed to Troy? And you just imagine the original audience, like on the edge of their seats. Everything they think they know about Helen is wrong. Just kind of that was a fun one. Another one I liked was Ajax by Sophocles. It just kind of tells the story of after the death of Achilles, Ajax and Odysseus are who's going to get Achilles' armor, and it's between Odysseus and Odysseus gets it, and then Ajax kills himself, and he kills himself with a sword, but that sword was given to him by Hector in the Iliad. When Hector and Ajax fight, they kind of fight to a draw, and so Hector gives Ajax his sword, and then Ajax gives Hector his belt, and the belt is what Achilles uses to drag Hector around after he kills him, and the sword is what Ajax uses to kill himself. And so they're just like, you don't find that out in the Iliad. You just find out what these two people traded with each other, but then just kind of see like the ramifications for that. And it's just kind of one of those things that's just mentioned in the Iliad, and then you see a fuller story there, and it's just so cool. Medea by Euripides, I loved that one. There's this idea that Medea, she just thinks she can kill somebody, and so the idea there is that you can't kill somebody and just not have there be ramifications. It's the question that is asked in Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Can you kill somebody and not have Raskolnikov is asking, or he thinks he's got this hypothesis that he can kill somebody and it not impact him. He can get away with it by the law, but can he get by with it in looking at himself in the mirror? And so it's that question: can you kill somebody? And no, yes, you can kill somebody, but no, you can't, in the sense of like living past that and without there being ramifications. And there's this line that says, "Dead? No, they live to haunt your lie with vengeance." or haunt your life with vengeance. And so just you can't kill somebody and that be the end of it. Last one that I really loved, and this is kind of a series. This was just different plays about Heracles, and these were there was one by Sophocles and then a few by Euripides. But I really liked the Heracles character. I liked learning about him. A lot of tragedy in that story, but it ties into Philoctetes. It ties into the Trojan War, and even the bow that kills Paris. The start of all of the Trojan War by taking or seducing Helen. So just so many points that connect, but all those stories about Heracles, I really, really enjoyed those. So those are some of my favorites. Now I want to get into a suggested reading structure. So if I were to do this over again, and specifically if I were to do this again as someone that it was kind of a newbie to Greek mythology, I would do things differently. And I wrote an article about this past week, and so I'll link to that in the show notes. But I would basically divide up the tragedies, not by author like I did, and then start with Aeschylus and then go to Sophocles and go to Euripides, but I would read them by epic fragments. And mythology wise, and then I would try to have mythic coherence in the sense of you're reading them in order as they would be mythologically, to where the story builds upon each other. I was jumping all around, and I would read a later part of the story and then go back to an earlier part, and that was fine. It was fun, but what would really help is just kind of to read them in order of mythologies. So as you're reading, they're building on one another. So I presented a suggested reading structure where you start with the Trojan epic cycle, even though the Theban one starts before, to start with the Trojan epic cycle, because I say you need to start with the Iliad and the Odyssey. So start with those epic poems, those epic war stories by Homer, and you need to get those under your belt to understand a lot of the Greek tragedies. If you've just finished the Iliad and the Odyssey, going into the works on the Greek epic cycle, it's just kind of a natural extension because that story is already in your mind. From there, then go into the Trojan epic cycle, and I have these all broken out in that article, and then go to the other, where it's just kind of all the other mythic stories where like Heracles would be part of that, and different stories like that. With that, you've got the mythic coherence. I think that would just really, really help you. There's such a deep excitement in discovering and learning about new aspects of the story as you encounter them. And I think you just remember it better that way. So there's the question of, do I try to learn Greek mythology before I get into these Greek tragedies? And I would say just dive into these stories. You're going to pick up the mythology along the way. There are some great resources like the Homeric hymns, Hesiod, or even Mythology by Edith Hamilton, a more recent book. That one's actually excellent because it covers the myths from all these different sources and kind of gives you the full story. So I actually read that before I even read Homer, and it's a good place to start. But if you don't want to start there, just diving into these tragedy plays and kind of learning the myths as you go it is so much fun. It's like the Marvel Universe movies now, where you can just go and watch one of the movies and be entertained, but the more you know about the universe and the mythology behind it, the more each thing means. There's also a work, one of those green Loa books called the Greek Epic Fragments. I suggest reading that at some point, just because it gives coherence to the Theban epic cycle and the Trojan epic cycle, and just kind of helps you know where you are in that time frame. All right, what's next? Well, I finished the Greek tragedies. I'm actually reading through the fragments of Euripides right now. So that's a 2-book series, and I'm on the second book of that. I love that so much. I'll probably do an episode on the fragments of Euripides at some point. And then after that, I go into the comedies, and the comedies are our main playwright for those is Aristophanes. Especially with these fragments by Euripides, I've been learning about we know so much of them because of Aristophanes, and Aristophanes would kind of riff on and make fun of these these tragedy playwrights. So he's kind of the Saturday Night Live of his time, and he wrote these plays making fun of them. They're funny, and so we know a lot about those tragedy plays from Aristophanes. But I'm looking forward to that just because I've been 3 tragedy authors, and now I'm going to get into the comedy writers. And like I did with the tragedies, I'm going to read all of the plays by Aristophanes. I had to buy quite a few different books just to get them all, but I can't wait to do that. So I'm probably looking at the month of June being focused on Aristophanes. So in conclusion here, we are so unbelievably fortunate to have these Greek tragedies. I was just thinking the other day of like people in my family line. I don't even think it would have been possible for people to have read all of the Greek tragedies until recently. One, they just weren't available for a lot of history, where they might have been in a monastery in the Byzantine Empire or something, or in a language that was unknown. We have them translated for us. We have all of them that have survived. It's just an incredible time to be alive. The University of Colorado just discovered parts of one of Euripides' plays. There's this potential that we might find more of these. It's an incredible time to be alive, but just. We are so lucky and fortunate to have those. Take advantage of that. Read through some or all of these Greek tragedies. I think you could probably get through all of them between 3 and 6 months. Again, I read some of them 2, 3, 4 times each. It just helped me to kind of get the story down, but spend the time to read them. If you want to read all of them, look at the structure that I suggest reading them in, or just kind of pick some of them, some of the more famous ones, and start reading them. Get together with a group, read them in a group. They are so fun. They're talking about major ideas. They're talking about major issues. They're talking about things that we are talking about now, that we see in our politics, we see in our news. These are not new ideas. We're not experiencing these for the first time. These were dramatized in Greek tragedy, a lot of them, and it just provides such a fun and interesting way to think of them and consider them. So I hope this has sparked an interest in the Greek tragedies for you if you've never experienced them. And just, a year ago, I had not experienced them. I had never read a single Greek tragedy. I never read one in school. And now I've read all of them. I don't even if I had studied them in school, I probably would have only read a few by each playwright. I've now read all of them, and I consider it to be one of my most enjoyable reading experiences going through these tragedies. So I do hope you give it a shot. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week. I'll probably cover some of these other Greek tragedies that I haven't done so far. I also want to cover those fragments by Euripides, and then I'll be getting into the comedies by Aristophanes after that. So until then, keep reading, keep listening, and keep learning. I'm out.